19 or
17 years. And they have spent almost 150 million on the FINSAC report. So why the Prime Minister don't just release the FINSAC report?
It was my first thought when I heard the comment.
Nigel Clark said they are not going to release it. They are going to use it for research purposes. People, university students can go and release it. After they spend 150, so Prime Minister just release the report. You say you want the children today to understand what took place. Just release the FINSAC report now. Just release it. We spend $150 million.
I don't understand it.
Just release it.
One of the loudest voices for the FINSAC report was on the show.
Precisely. Why don't you just release it? Just release it. Why you think they can't release it? Just release it, Prime Minister. All right, so that's one. Two.
Yes. He also mentioned an inflation rate of 77% for 1 year.
All right, fine. When Dr. Omar Davies took office in 1992-93, yeah, inflation jumped to 70% because we had liberalized the economy. Prior to 1989, yeah, the JLP and Mr. Siaga had a full auction system. We used to call people and tell people so they not to come at the auction. It wasn't
auction, the dollar.
Foreign exchange.
Yes.
It was a market-driven system. You follow me? When they were leaving office, he went over BOJ and told the people that the thing soon bust. It bust from 7 and change and start run to 14. And then Michael and PJ said us liberalize the thing with the advice of the private sector. That resulted in the jump in the inflation rate, right? At that time, the banking sector, the Banking Act needed to be overhauled. There was no Financial Services Commission to regulate the non-deposit taking financial sector. There was no deposit insurance, right? All right. What Prime Minister failed to tell you then was that between the period 1980, when the debt to GDP was 60%. So I give the Prime Minister a lesson about economics and the history of Jamaica, since him not know. It was 60%. When Omar Davies took office as finance minister, the debt to GDP ratio was 262%, the highest ever in Jamaica. We never reached back the same. Follow me? All right. We never successfully completed no IMF test in Jamaica. Omar Davies was the first man who completed a successful IMF test, 12 consecutive. That is 1995 Prime Minister. Between 1995 and 2007, when the JLP came back to power, we never had a borrowing agreement with the IMF. We paid off the IMF. Remember that?
Yes.
Yep.
Yes.
The debt to GDP was 115%, coming from 216 to 262% under Mr. Siada. Yep. One of the things we also note was that poverty came down from 34% under Mr. Siaga and the JLP to 9%. Unemployment from 17% to 9%. Talking about inflation, when Omar Davies left office, inflation was 5%. Yeah? The fiscal deficit was 5% of GDP. When Omar Davies took office, the net international reserves were minus 500 million. He brought them to 2.4 billion, so we can talk about NIR now. You follow me? So that was the last time the economy grew by 3%.
Right.
So what he did, he never gave you the full summary of what
No, but you wouldn't expect him to.
Precisely. So he's lying to the students who is saying that he wants to cover. Now, in terms of being a guru on the economy, right? The Prime Minister can't pretend to be no guru on the economy, because if we fast forward between 2007 and 2012, the Prime Minister was the leader of government business in the House when the most reckless policies in Jamaica in terms of economics were conducted. When we got locked out of the international capital markets. That's the worst thing that can happen to any country. Yeah? So if the Prime Minister is economic guru, how was he a part of an administration that was telling the people that the Great Recession of 2000
would have no impact
on the country? Yeah? Or would he be part of an administration that delayed for 2 years between 2008 and February of 2010 to get an agreement with the IMF? And then they never know which agreement to take. They took the wrong agreement, a 27-month standby facility when they needed an extended fund facility.
Right.
The debt to GDP was 147%. The fiscal deficit was 7.5% of GDP. The overall public sector deficit was 10.75% of GDP. The current account deficit was 18% of GDP. They took 2.4 billion from the IMF, IDB, and those countries up front. and never did anything that was supposed to be done. Peter Phillips had to walk with his resignation every day in order to get that problem fixed, get this from the international community. Why the Prime Minister never tell the student them that?
Maybe he never have enough time.
Maybe he never have enough time. Fast forward back to, again, the FINSAC wasn't a crisis. FINSAC was a solution that was created to deal with the crisis.
Right.
The first man to head FINSAC was Dr. Gladstone Bonny.
Right.
Then when he left, Patrick Hilton took over.
Okay.
Yeah. What caused FINSAC the breakdown in the financial sector? First it was Blaze Trust and Merchant Bank.
Right.
Then in July of 1996, it was Century National Bank.
Yeah. Workers Bank.
Yeah. Persons who were closely associated with the Prime Minister said they borrowed money from Central National Bank and forget to pay it back. That was a part of the financial sector crisis.
Forgot to pay it back.
Forgot to pay it back. Prime Minister forgot that. Just release the FINSAC report.
It's a simple thing.
Simple.
It is good to know your history. It's good to know where you're coming from, etc. But I think if Joe Biden, who gave the State of the Union address last night, I think if he were to constantly refer to what George W. Bush did to the economy, they would have stolen him in tomato.
Of course, long time. People don't want to hear that.
Move on.
People don't want to hear that.
We want to know where to know.
Yeah, one thing that the Prime Minister said again yesterday, my problem is with productivity.
Yes.
To get the public sector to deliver. But you paid out 200 billion between 2021 and 2022 and told us that you'd get more efficiency and more productivity. Yeah, so how that is a problem now? Why you pay out the money without the productivity? And you say you're an economic guru.
Yeah.
One basic thing an economic guru must know is that wages must be determined by the marginal productivity of the labor concern.
Right.
So clearly Prime Minister as an economic guru never read J.B. Clark.
J.B. Clark?
Yeah.
As opposed to Nigel?
No. J.B. Clark from Columbia University, not Nigel Clark.
In 1980, when Seaga came to power, the Jamaica's debt to GDP ratio was 63%. The debt ballooned to 262% of GDP in 1989, which represents an increase of 315.8% in Jamaica's indebtedness over the 9-year period of the JLP-Seaga administration. Any single-digit growth in the economy in the face of the growth in debt was of no particular significance and consequence. It must be noted that the source of the minimal growth over the period was primarily due to a reduction in oil price in 1986 and beyond. Contrary to popular belief, this was not due to any successful investment projects nor any new investments apart from sweatshop jobs in the garment industry. David Rockefeller, who came to turn Jamaica into the Singapore of the Caribbean, packed his bags and left Jamaica in less than 5 months of his arrival following several disagreements with Seaga. Most ironically, the flight of capital continued under Seaga with ExxonMobil, the principal oil refinery, pulling out of Jamaica. The gas station lines were long and uncomfortable as people who had urgent business to attend to were locked in gas lines for hours. Life in Jamaica began to make no sense. Migration and brain drain gained momentum. The major bauxite companies followed closely behind Exxon, leaving Jamaica. From 1980 to 1983, the JLP government, under Seaga, failed a minimum of 4 IMF tests. And as the pressure of a rapidly deteriorating economy hit Seaga, he seized on a distraction of the political crisis of Grenada and called a snap election in 1983. The PMP did not contest, and so the JLP had all 60 seats in the Parliament and 21 in the Senate. With no opposition in Parliament, Seaga began to indiscriminately wield his axe. This included the Tax Acts as well as his axing of many government departments resulting in widespread closures and thousands of redundancies. 18,000 public sector workers lost their jobs. He dismantled the structure of the local government system, leaving the parish councils with the singular responsibility of managing markets and cemeteries, bereft of funds. The only duty left for mayors to perform, without authority of the Minister of Local Government, was that of approving the exhuming of bodies. The KSAC was abolished. Duncan Field and Grazing Sugar Estates were closed. Monique Teachers College and Jamaica School of Agriculture closed. An auction system introduced where those who wanted foreign exchange to conduct business could apply to BOJ twice per week on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Several hospitals were either closed or downgraded, including Ulster Spring, Spalding's, Alexandria, Noel Holmes in Lucy, Hordley in St. Thomas, listed to be downgraded or not to be, etc. The community health aid program was abolished, and the spraying of ganja, justifiable or unjustifiable, were damaging other legitimate economic efforts of the rural poor, in particular bee farmers and coffee farmers. Things got so bad that the BOJ in 1985, a load of crude oil arrived to be offloaded at the Montego Bay terminal, but the captain refused to unload the oil until he received payment from the JLP government. Hugh Hart, a Minister of Tourism and Energy during that time, had to quickly gather up, with the help of the police, US dollar donations from private businessmen in Mobay to pay for the crude oil. After a successful effort of the JLP government begging private citizens to pay its oil bill, the BOJ was able to pay the cargo ship captain his money. He unloaded the crude oil and left Jamaica's shores. One of the manifestations of the policies of Siaga in the 1980s was the dramatic increase of the flow of people on the streets selling for survival. These were the victims of downsizing and right-sizing program gleefully pursued by Siaga. The misery index rose exponentially, and in the 1989 elections, Siaga and the JLP lost 45 out of the 60 parliamentary seats, and 4 seats later, the JLP lost 7 more in the elections of 1993. This represents a total of 52 seats within 4 years after being in power for the 9 years leading up to the 1989 elections. The ongoing attempt to pass off the 1980s as anything but an ugly and painful period for the Jamaican people is tantamount to the GG being given a throne speech to read in 2011 by the then JLP government that the, quote, economy has fully recovered, end quote. This, after the IMF cut the flow of funds from the previous year in June 2010 to Jamaica, and the national debt in 2011 was growing by an average of over US $10 billion per month. This propaganda is taking advantage of the young and educated but indolent section of the population that are frequently and fluently repeating the foolishness. Time has passed, and even the present political practitioners need to be refreshed, as they are only human. Equally important, the people need to be refreshed cerebrally. For herein lies the importance of staying the course, for what can happen is real, for it has happened before. If many people are told the extent to which things can get bad and shown dramatically the painful pathways we have already walked, particularly at the hands of the JLP and Siaga, I believe more will believe.